Hello, 5th and 6th grade. Today we are going on to the next section in social studies, which is 10.3 on page 179, and we are reading Important Civil War Battles. So 179, 10.3. So go ahead, grab your books, read along with me, and then we'll go through the questions at the end. So we've read up to this point about the Civil War. The Civil War was started in efforts to get rid of slavery. The South has decided they wanted to be their own country. They broke off from the North, and President Lincoln said, no, we want to keep you in the Union. We want to keep everyone together, but we do need to talk about the slavery issue. And so that's when battle erupted. And so the fight here is between the North and the South, specifically about whether or not slavery should be abolished or gotten rid of, or if it should continue for the southern states. Important Civil War battles. During the first 2 years of the Civil War, the North lost more battles than it won. Most of the fighting took place in the South. The Confederates fought hard to keep the North from sweeping back across the land. The Battle of Gettysburg. In the spring of 1863, the Confederates decided to push their troops to the north. In a bold move, General Robert E. Lee marched 70,000 men from Virginia to Pennsylvania. Union and Confederate troops met in a bloody battle at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. 3 days of fighting resulted in the deaths of over 7,000 Union and Confederate men, and the South lost the Battle of Gettysburg, the turning point of the war. I know many of you have said you've been to Gettysburg before. It's an amazing historical site that I hope someday to go visit. But it is a historical site, so there's no buildings or anything on it. So you can actually go and walk in the field and kind of replay in your mind what that would have been like with 70,000 plus people fighting all on one field. The Battle of Vicksburg. On the 4th of July, 1863, General Grant was defeated by the Confederates at Vicksburg, Mississippi. By gaining control of Vicksburg, the Union Army won control of the Mississippi River. No longer could the Confederates on one side of the river send supplies to the Confederates on the other side. Although the South was cut in two, she still would not give up. So this was a huge turning point. Having control of the Mississippi River meant they had control of shipping routes. They had control of what was being shipped upstream across the river in order to get supplies to other parts of the army. And so by cutting off supplies to the other half of the South, cutting off arms, cutting off, not actual arms, but guns, cutting off ammunition, food supply, this really cut their army in half. We're going to read that little box on the right there before we go on to the next page. Events in history, the Gettysburg Address. The Battle of Gettysburg took a terrible toll on both the North and the South armies. Thousands of men died in this battle. After the battle, Gettysburg became a great cemetery. A special ceremony was held to honor the men who had been killed at Gettysburg. Many famous people were scheduled to speak, including President Lincoln. The main speaker at Gettysburg on November 19, 1863, was a famous orator or speaker named Edward Everett. For 2 hours, he held the audience spellbound as he described in flowery language the events of the recent battle. Then came the president's turn to speak. But instead of a long speech, Lincoln spoke for less than 3 minutes. He spoke in 10 simple, direct sentences and then sat down. But those 10 sentences, known as the Gettysburg Address, make up one of the most famous and familiar speeches in American history. Edward Everett's long speech has been forgotten, but everyone is familiar with the Gettysburg Address. Sherman's March to the Sea. Everyone was tired of fighting. General Grant had made plans which he hoped would hasten the end of the war. In 1864, he sent General William T. Sherman to capture Atlanta, Georgia, an important city of the Confederates. From there, he wanted Sherman to march to Savannah, Georgia, on the Atlantic coast. Believing that the only way to make the South surrender was to discourage her even further, Sherman gave orders for his Union troops to burn or destroy everything they found, including homes, barns, animals, food, and crops. The South could not possibly keep fighting much longer after such terrible destruction. The Civil War comes to a close. Meanwhile, General Grant had been fighting General Lee to capture Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederate States. After many months of hard fighting, the Union troops surrounded the Confederate Army. The Confederates had been beaten too many times. General Lee knew that there was nothing else that could be done but surrender. On April 9th, 1865, Lee met Grant in a farmhouse in the town of Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. Grant wrote very generous terms of surrender. Like President Lincoln, Grant had no desire to hurt the South further. In his terms of surrender, Grant wrote that the North would take no prisoners of war. General Grant allowed the Confederate soldiers to keep their horses because he realized that the Southern farmers would need these to help plant crops. He also allowed the officers of the Confederate Army to keep their guns and General Lee to keep his sword. When Lee read the terms of surrender that Grant had written, he said gratefully, "You have been very generous to the South." Now that the Confederate Army has surrendered, Grant ordered his food to be taken to the starving Confederate soldiers. After the war, results of the war. At last, the soldiers could return to their homes. Peace had come after 4 years of bitter fighting, 1861 to 1865. The war had settled 2 important issues. 1, no state could leave the Union, and 2, there would be no more slavery in the United States. So this was really important. The result of the war was not only was slavery abolished or gotten rid of in the South as well as the North, but now it was under law that no state could leave the Union. This is all part of the United States, all under one government. And so it was written in that, nope, you can't become your own country anymore. Plans for peace. Just before the war ended, the people of the United States elected Abraham Lincoln to his 2nd term as president. President Lincoln made it clear that he looked forward to a time when our nation would be whole again. He did not intend to punish the South. He spoke these words to our nation: with malice, which means hatred, toward none, with charity or love for all. Then he asked the people to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who have borne the battle, and for his widow and orphan, to do to all which may achieve a just and lasting peace. So really, he was saying to the North and the South to love your enemy. You guys have been enemies for 4 years. You've been fighting hard. And now we need to move into peace. And in order to do that, we need to show love and compassion to those that we've been hating for the last 4 years. And not everyone agreed with this. Lincoln did not say only the North or only the South. Instead, he referred to all. President Lincoln planned to bring peace again to the whole country. Unfortunately, he did not live to carry out his plans. President Lincoln shot. The Civil War had been over for only 5 days when a very tired but happy president took his wife to see a play at the Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. While they were watching the play, a half-crazed actor named John Wilkes Booth slipped through the theater to where the president sat and shot Lincoln, probably because he blamed Lincoln for the Civil War. Men carried the president to a house across the street from the theater where he died the next morning. Our whole nation mourned the death of this great man. Even the South was beginning to realize the friend that they had in President Lincoln. A bitter peace. Vice President Andrew Johnson became president in Lincoln's place. Although Johnson wanted to carry out Abraham Lincoln's wishes, many men in Congress felt bitter towards the South. These men were able to make Congress strong enough to stop President Johnson's plans. As a result, for several years, Congress passed laws that punished the South. Fortunately, with the passing of time, the bitterness caused by the Civil War was forgotten. Once again, the men from the North and the South were willing to stand side by side to help their country. All right, so comprehension check. Some things that we need to identify today. So first, identify the battle that was the turning point for the war won by the North. So go back and look through some of the battles that talked about Gettysburg, Vicksburg, some of those around that area, and which one was considered or coined as the turning point for the war. We had learned before that the South was winning all the battles. The North was winning very little, but this was a point in the war where the North won a very important battle, and it started turning point so that the North was winning. Number 2, identify the importance of the Battle of Vicksburg. Why was that so important? 3, identify the town in which Lee surrendered to Grant. And 4, identify the man who shot President Lincoln. All right, next time we're going to go on to 10.4, which is other event in Civil War times. So there were other things going on while the Civil War was going on. So we'll learn about that next time.